Everybody, it is Mike Schumann of the Daily Hoosier here for another episode of the East 17th podcast. I am joined by Seth Tao of the Daily Hoosier and honorary guest Ali. I guess we'll say he's of the Daily Hoosier as well, since he's been with us for a while. He looks very excited to be here today, as many Indiana fans are excited right now. Our topic is the IU basketball 2025 coaching search, and that's got everybody, humans and canines alike, excited right now. Seth, we can start with Ali if you want. What's his take on the situation?
I don't know. What do you think?
That was a perfectly timed yawn. He's like, "Oh, you're talking about that? I'm bored." No, and speaking of timing, that's where I want to start with this whole thing. You know, the news broke exactly a week ago today. At least it broke kind of secondhand, got passed through to the national guys, and then IU formalized it on Friday. But I want to talk about that. You know, we talked on the podcast, I think maybe the last time you and I got together, that, you know, would they allow this thing to go through the Michigan game, because it seemed like a real inflection point. You know, people I talked to, you know, kind of substantiate that that was a compelling factor, that they just didn't need another ugly scene like that after what happened against Illinois. And I think, you know, the way they played against Wisconsin in that game right before the Michigan game kind of was the final impetus to get this thing over the line. You know, but you don't see this very often in college basketball. You don't see like a midseason change. We saw it with Holtman last year. It happens from time to time. What do you see as kind of like the pros and cons of having this happen now? You know, ostensibly, you know, 6 weeks, 2 months before a lot of potential candidates are even going to be available.
First off, gosh, it's only been a week since it feels like it's been so much longer than only a week.
Exactly.
But I mean, for you to say like, oh, you know, it doesn't happen that often, like to an extent, but it feels like over the last year, we've seen more and more of these like maybe different timed things. I mean, between, you know, you mentioned Chris Holtman last year, but I mean, you know, look outside the Big Ten. I mean, Tony Bennett retired like right as preseason was starting at Virginia, and you had Jim Larinaga step down at Miami like with immediate effect midseason, unlike Woodson. So, you know, we've seen more and more of that sort of thing around college basketball. And to be frank, I mean, I feel like the transfer portal, you know, opening so quickly, like right, you know, in March in the middle of the tournament, and, you know, how there's just no real natural stopping point anymore for, you know, it felt like in the past you'd see all these sort of coaching changes happen in, you know, March. You know, if a team wasn't in the tournament, you'd see, you know, after the season would end, you know, teams would make these moves, and you'd see a lot of turnover in the coaching world happen in April because of that. And you just can't really have that. It's hard to do that now. And so, and I'm sure that you have a lot of these schools reevaluating their timelines on things as far as when they want to make a move, if they kind of need to make a move, because you can't put your new coach too far behind the eight ball in the portal when they come in, because they gotta, you know, especially with the way that rosters are going to turn over when you make a coaching move, you're going to need to bring in a lot of pieces from the transfer portal. So you don't want to put yourself at too much of a disadvantage there. So that's kind of that aspect of it. But I mean, you're absolutely right that they could not afford to have another ugly atmosphere at Assembly Hall with the Michigan game. And that's exactly what would have happened after, you know, if they didn't make any sort of announcement or move with the way that they played at Wisconsin. And look, they obviously played really well at Purdue and could have won that game. And, you know, who knows what happened. You know, I'd be interested to see if they still would have done this before the Michigan game. Like, what happens if they win that game at Purdue but still do what they did at Wisconsin? Like, I'm sure that would have changed things a little bit. Just the vibe for that going into that Wisconsin game would have been a little bit different if they had actually won that game up at Purdue. But I mean, with the way things played out, that was going to be an ugly scene at Assembly Hall if they didn't make any sort of move, both just with the way IU had been playing on its own, not to mention the fact that it's Michigan and Dusty May coming in there. And Dusty is obviously got all this buzz around him. Yeah, the IU connection. You know, he's got Michigan off to having a very nice season. His first year up there, he did what he did at FAU. And he's just, you know, obvious, you know, it would have been ugly both with, you know, the fan disdain towards Woodson and IU players, but also with, a guy that they would be wanting to succeed, Woodson, on the other
Right.
sideline. And it's just, it does seem like Indiana couldn't afford to create that sort of atmosphere again.
And I think if that was step one in this whole process for however long it goes, you give them a check as a positive
Yeah.
mission accomplished. The scene on Saturday I thought was generally very positive. Mike Woodson's name was announced. You could find boos if you listened hard enough, but it was nothing like what we had heard in previous iterations. And Dusty May, received what I would just call a really nice, friendly, positive applause. But there were no chants during the game about hire Dusty, no chants about firing Woodson. Um, and the crowd booed a ton going into halftime, but that was more just like, God, the product in the court was awful. You guys deserve to be
Mhm.
booed off the court. I mean, I think that would happen if any of the coaches we're going to talk about here had a half like that. That's just part of sport. So
Indiana, if Indiana was undefeated this season and played that first
yeah,
half, they still would have gotten booed off the
yeah,
court.
deservedly so, deservedly so. I want to talk about what it means to fire a coach midseason. I think from the positive aspect, you think about Scott Dolson and whoever's advising him. I like the idea of having a lot of time, a lot of runway. You fire Archie Miller, I think it was on March 15th, and Tom Crean right around the same time. You're going right into a very intense search. And I think it's even more timing is even more of the essence now because of the transfer portal, as you mentioned. Like you've got to just find somebody quick. We saw that with Signetti. You got to get them quick just so you can dive right into the portal. So Dolson has a lot of time to have conversations with agents and think people of that nature, taking temperatures. Who's really interested in this job. Being able to just openly say we have a job opening. Who's really interested. You can socialize some terms, and see how much that plays into it. So I think that's really positive, so that when these coaches that they're going to pursue do start freeing up their seasons and they can have actual live conversations with them. It's not just kind of raw off the cuff. It's very well established, and it's probably just yes or no at that point. The you tell me. I've been trying to think of downsides to being in the position that they're in right now. The one I can think of, and we're already seeing it a little bit, is the idea that people that they would target, take a Dusty May, they're Michigan in his case, but any case really, is going to be compelled to start trying to negotiate to keep him on the other side. And that kind of puts IU in a difficult spot where anybody that's perceived to be a threat that Indiana could hire, the other side is going to try to, do the obvious thing to try to keep their guy. So um, I was trying to think through that the other day, and I think Dusty could conceivably sign a new 10-year deal, worth $80 million. And that in and of itself wouldn't be the part that would keep Indiana at bay. It would be his buyout, which right now seems to be right around $5 million. But if he negotiated a new $20 million buyout in a deal like that, that would be very clear that he doesn't want to make a move, and that would kind of end the conversation, I think, at that point, because there's no reason, if he wanted to consider IU, that he would put them in that position, because Indiana would be the school that would ultimately have to pay that buyout. So is there anything else that kind of jumps out to you, kind of pros and cons for Indiana being in the position that they're in right now?
Yeah, well, let's be honest here that Scott Dolson, I have to imagine his process for all of this started before the announcement
For
of
sure.
Woods, and maybe that isn't just that may not necessarily be reaching out to currently employed coaches, because I'm sure that would be, and their agents, I'm sure that would be a bad look. But that doesn't mean he's not informally sort of having those sorts of conversations and placing out little small feelers, and maybe getting organized internally. Like, he talked so much about, when they brought Kurt Signetti in for football, he talked a lot about just his process and how they had a clear, agenda of, these are the things that we want in our next head coach. This is, where we envision the program going. And they just kind of had a clear list of things that they were looking to align with in the next coach of IU football. And that
Right.
in some ways kind of made it easier to identify the targets that they wanted to go after, instead of just kind of casting this wide net across the whole country of, who would be interested in taking this job. And, that's not nothing. That's not nothing.
Right.
And, that sort of thing is important, will help you conduct a more efficient and effective search for when you're looking for a new head coach. So, and that's not something, like I said, that's something that you can be doing while Mike Woodson, before he's officially, stepping down at the end of the season. That may have already begun. I'm not sure that announcing it when they did was really anything more than just kind of making it official, and so that, like you say, Dolson can now officially say, we're going to have a job opening. Would you be interested? Not,
Right.
that, and there's a difference between that and, hey, like, if we were to ever have an opening, like, would you be interested, or
Right.
something like that? Like,
Right.
there's a big difference there. And so, there's that difference. But as far as look, I don't know that there's any real tangible advantage they get as far as, doing it mid-season, is, within their search, because it's not, they're not going to hire another, like, any current college head coach or assistant coach, if they were going to bring in an assistant or whatever, like any currently employed college coach, they wouldn't be able to bring them in until after the season ended anyway. So
Right.
it's not like, say that they, had Woodson, step down immediately, they would need an interim coach. It's not like they can just pull, say, Dusty May. If Dusty May wanted the job, it's not like Dusty May is just going to leave Michigan right now and take over
Right.
Indiana. So it's not like they're gaining an edge on the market that way by getting to these candidates first over other programs that may, make moves in the coming weeks. But so they're not getting a tangible edge, like, in that way, in the timing of it, because, you're going to still end up announcing a new coach probably in, mid to late March, which they may have been doing anyway if they waited until after Indiana's season ended. But I think one con I will say is that it can lead to, even more so, and we saw it in the first half against Michigan, it can lead to players just even more checking out from this
Yeah.
current team. Like, it was definitely better against Michigan State, obviously, since they won the game. But like,
Right.
in that first half against Michigan, a lot of guys looked like they just, and you commented on it before the game that, it seemed like players were coming out a little later. Pre-game routines may have changed. It's just the pre-game vibe was a little different going into that Michigan game, and understandably so, given the
Right.
news. But you don't want, even if, like, making this announcement and having Woodson step down at the end of the season is, even if you say that that's an admission that this season hasn't gone the way you wanted it to, and even if you realistically don't think that this team is going to go to the NCAA tournament, which, maybe they can still get in, give it, that's a separate conversation. But even if you think that, the season's over, you still do not want, it's still a bad look to have your players just totally checked out. And that's a potential con of this, is if and look, they got it right against Michigan State, but who's to say what happens from game to game, especially as the coaching search goes on, as more names are connected to the job, as more news and leaks and stuff come out about what's going to happen. And surely all these players are thinking about their futures too, which is something else we're going to get to later. There's just a lot of moving pieces right now for the players, and it's understandable, for some of them to kind of have their heads spinning a little bit with all this.
Sure.
But you don't want them to be, like, totally checked out. That's just a bad look.
Yeah, and I will say I somewhat expected that to be the case because, if I'm being just completely blunt, I felt like some of them were checked out before the news came out, at least, looking at from time to time the product on the court. But, that second half against Michigan and pretty much the whole game against Michigan State, there's real no indication that has happened. And I think you could even argue the opposite, that some of these guys seem like that they're motivated by what's going on. And everybody's got their own motivations. Like these guys playing for NBA careers or other reasons that they have. There's a lot of good reasons if you're a player to continue to do the right things and try to, if you're not even bought in from the team aspect, to put your best foot forward from a player's aspect. So I think that's been a positive development, and kind of it's changed the way I look at some things. I would expect that to continue, especially since, as you mentioned, they are still in the conversation for postseason. I think if they win on Friday night, tomorrow night against UCLA, I think they're right there on that kind of probably first four out type of line, because that would be their fourth quad one win. So they're right there. So it's interesting. I want to transition though to, and you alluded to this a little bit, criteria for the job. Because I've thought about this a little bit, and I remember when we talked to Scott Dolson after Signetti was hired, he told us kind of what his criteria was for hiring Signetti. And I think there's a lot of parallels. Some of them are obvious, like having a winner. Like, yeah, no kidding. You want to have a winner, but there's degrees to
I
that.
eagerly await the day that an athletic director comes out and says, "I want to bring in a loser."
Well, I won't say what I'm thinking. Sometimes what you do indicates more than what you actually say. But how about that? Um,
Anyway.
yeah. Anyway, let's call it degrees of winning. Like Kurt Signetti had a clear track record. Everywhere he went, everybody knows the story. Google him. He won, and he obviously proved last year that was no fluke. What I think is going to be a little bit different with Indiana, at least starting at the top of Scott's board, I would guess would be a proven winner at the high major level. Because I think, in this era of transfer portaling and NIL and everything that goes into that, proving it at high major is different than anywhere else. Now you could say, Signetti didn't come from a high major and he was able to translate. And I certainly won't underestimate the value of things like culture and knowing how to recruit to that culture. But I think all things being equal, being a high major successful coach is going to matter to Scott. And Scott also valued offense when he made the football hire, and I think that's going to be significant in this one as well. I think that just a coach that has proven to run modern offense that is not only successful on the court but attractive to potential recruits both at the high school and transfer portal ranks, I think is going to be important. And as an extension of that, a proven record as a recruiter is going to be critical. That was Signetti's background when he started at Alabama. He was the recruiting coordinator. And I think somebody that has that proven track record as a college coach is going to be something that's real important to Scott.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much everything you said checks out. I mean, I don't think I really have anything to add.
Okay. All right. That I wrote about this the other day. And rather than going through my talking points, since I just kind of blabbed and stole all your thunder on the criteria, I posited the question: is IU basketball still an elite coaching job in 2025? And the juxtaposition I made was, you can't only look at the way that they played on the court for the last 25, 30 years. You have to also evaluate the kind of the intangibles and dynamics around the program to make that assessment. But what's your take? Like, I think most Indiana fans would say, well, I'm not going to say that because I'm getting a lot of feedback from fans that are saying, no, it's not the job it was. And, you need to lower your expectations and not hire, you not think you're going to get the best of the best for this job anymore. But what's your read on it? Both, how much does that matter that they haven't been an elite program lately? And, what's your assessment of kind of where they should set their standards?
I mean, look, I think you get into a bit of a debate show sort of thing with this conversation, top 5 this, top 10 that. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, I mean, you can, argue over individual schools here and there. look, is it the job it quote unquote used to be? I mean, I don't think anybody would sit up here and say that Indiana is the same program it was when Bob Knight was head coach.
Right.
That much has been obvious over the last 25 years.
Right.
So, no, I don't. Anybody who thinks that is kidding themselves. But that's not to say of course, Indiana's a good job. It's probably, a top, I probably would say it's in the top tier of college basketball jobs, but it also depends on where you draw the line for that top tier.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot, and the tricky thing, it can be hard to separate like what makes what a good program versus just a team that's been winning for a long time. Like, say that Mark Few stepped down at Gonzaga, Gonzaga's been such a consistent winner over that time, but say Mark Few stepped down from that job, you'd have a similar discussion. Where does this job actually rank separate from Mark Few? Think about Michigan State, whenever Tom Izzo, hangs it up and moves on, Michigan State's been such a consistent, strong program, throughout Tom Izzo's tenure. But, and I would put Michigan State in the same sort of tier as the IU job in general. But, you kind of have to separate the job from the results a little bit. And I mean, when you look at what Indiana has, they have an absolutely rabid fan base that is starving for consistent success. And, and look, to be frank, that can be a pro and a con at times because of just the amount of pressure that it puts on coaches to win. The seemingly, I don't know about short leash in terms of job security, but the short fans clearly are not long. It doesn't take fans long to turn on, coaches and players if they're not, performing up to standard, whether that's, booing at the games, whether that's, vocal sections on message boards and stuff, that's podcasters like us. And look, that only matters to a certain extent, but that it does, the fishbowl aspect of the job, it's not, I'd add that to the list of criteria that you mentioned before. It's, not only somebody that has been able to win, consistently at the high major or professional level, but somebody that's proven they can handle the amount of pressure that comes with a job, the constant spotlight and, just the constant, just the rabidness of this fan base and the constant pressure that you're going to be under in this sort of a job, because it is that sort of job. That said, and I think what makes it a good job is if there is a coach who can restore Indiana to, quote unquote glory and turn them into the sort of consistent program. And when I say that, I don't even mean just catching fire one March and hanging a sixth banner. If there is a coach out there that can get Indiana back to a point of they're going to be in the tournament every single year, to the point of, where you put like a Kansas or a North Carolina, where they're going to be in the tournament pretty much every year and pretty highly seeded and going to have a realistic chance of doing something pretty much every year. Like, if there is a coach that can do that, I mean, all of a sudden this, people would view this job as easily one of the best in the country. He'd be the biggest star in probably the entire state of Indiana if that coach happens. You'd have to think. And I mean, so yeah, and obviously, when you look beyond just the history and the attention and all of that, I mean, Indiana's NIL seems to be really strong. One of the best, maybe the best in the Big Ten, one of the best in the Big Ten for basketball. The facilities are strong, but as Dusty May said, I thought Dusty May made a good point when he was talking about the IU job in general and just the program of the last 25 years. The advantage that Indiana may have had in some of those departments has withered away a little bit, and not by IU's own fault necessarily. It's not that IU doesn't have good, it's not that they've let their facilities, wilt away and go rotten or anything. I mean, sure, some people would find Assembly Hall old and would rather play in a shiny brand new arena, but there's obviously the history of all that. But it's not that it's not that Indiana's facilities are bad. It's that so many other programs around the country also have good facilities now. Like, that's just the way of modern college basketball. So that is only so much of an advantage now. But in total, I mean, you've got a state that consistently produces strong basketball recruits. You have a job that would, if you can come in and be consistently successful, would turn you into one of the biggest stars in college basketball coaching. And you have strong NIL to work with to make that happen. So, you can get into the semantics of, oh, I think, this job, I think this job is better than the IU job. I think IU is better than this job. But so I don't know exactly where you want to draw the line,
Right.
but but for the point blank question, is this a good, desirable job? Is this one of the better jobs in the country? I think it's, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I think not the least of which is that, I think for the right coach, I don't think just any coach, if they end up having to go well down their list, but for the right coach, I think it'll be one of the top paying jobs in the country, which
That
I
too, yeah.
think that's probably number one on the list, but not for everybody. One of the things you mentioned in there that I always find interesting because I constantly hear national people talk about the fishbowl, and I struggle with that as a concept. Like, to me, it's what you make of it, right? Like, you know, I'll keep going back to Dusty May because I'm gonna, we're gonna talk more about him here in a minute, but you know, there's some belief that like he was really close to taking the Louisville job, ended up at Michigan. Some people said that's because he was turned off by that concept, the fishbowl at Louisville. Like, but I guess I'm looking for you or anybody to talk me out of this because, like, what is the difference? Like, you're at Michigan, you're at Louisville. Both are high major programs. Both have a big fan base, crowd, social media, everything. So maybe the volume of the fishbowl, the attention of the fishbowl is at a 9 at Louisville and it's at a 7 at Michigan. Does it really matter on a day-to-day basis? I just don't see it. Like, you coach the team, you recruit the team, you you know do your job at practice. Like, to me, it's the rest of it is just noise that you either allow to get to you or you don't. And I think you were kind of touching on that. It's like somewhere in there is the type of guy you hire, like Mike Woodson, not good in this scenario. Archie Miller, not good in this scenario. So you do have to at least consider the attributes of the coach and whether or not they're a fit. But I think it's just overblown. Like, every high major coaching job is a fishbowl, and in my opinion, you're always going to have a toxic fan base to some limited extent. You're always going to have pressure. So I think it's overblown. But what do you think about that?
I mean, I agree with your point kind of generally, but I would also rebut with, it is what, like you say, it is what you make of it. And it's whether, these coaches, when you take a job like this, you have to know you're going to, deal with negativity and booing at times. And that's just, and that comes with the territory to an extent. But when you're talking about, it's just, you gotta not allow the noise to get in, and you got to be able to just handle it, and that just comes with the job. I think, and I obviously don't know why, if any of that is. I'm not talking specifically about Michigan and Louisville and Dusty
Right.
May. It's just kind of the example that we had out there. But with the bigger fishbowl, then there's more noise to block out, and I think that then that's the challenge of it is, and that's kind of what can make it difficult, and it could make it better in some ways if things are going really smoothly and really well and you're winning a lot, then it turns around and looks really good for you. But there's more noise to block out if things aren't going well. And
True.
it's easy for you to just say, oh, you're just doing your job at practice, you're coaching, you're focused on the guys, you're just, going out there and doing your job. It's easy to say from, our seat sitting right
Of
here, but
course.
then, and that also may be how it is, in the off season when, you're not going out there 2-3 times a week and putting it all on the line. But it's when you're in the heat of the season and you're going out there, you're winning games, you're losing games, and especially if things aren't going well, it's probably tougher to then block all of that sort of stuff out, because these guys are human at the end of the day. on top of any criticisms or doubts or just problems or just complaints and things that that fans may loathe about these coaches. When things aren't going well, they probably have their own self-doubts and their own, self-criticisms that they have to work through in their own head. And, when you're going through a period like that, it can become tougher to block out some of the outside noise. So that's what I'm saying, that part of and that's not just everything, because you can win while being a crazed lunatic and letting that stuff in. I mean, look up at UConn right now,
Right.
but you want a coach that you cannot have a coach come in and that's just going to wither and let all of that get to him and impact his performance and the team's performance. I think that has to be part of the criteria.
That's fair. That is fair. Um, and along those lines, like, I don't know if it's along those lines, but a point I wanted to make, just thinking about the coach search history at Indiana since Bob Knight, like I was trying to think, is this the most attractive the job has ever been? It's certainly more attractive than the day Bob Knight was fired. Like, nobody wanted to follow in those shoes. They really didn't even have a search at the end of the day. It was kind of, Mike Davis was pushed on the program by the players to a large extent. But that would have been a tough spot for anybody to come in. I think we're so far removed from that now that, Bob Knight's shadow is always going to be there, but I don't think it's going to be anything like it has been in the more recent iterations of this search. I think coming off Mike Davis, it was a little bit easier, but the dynamic in that one was weird because, as I understand it, the president at the time of Indiana, Adam Herbert, is the one who really kind of pushed and influenced that decision to hire Kelvin Sampson. So I'm not even sure that was a legitimate coaching search, if you will, at the end of the day. So that one had its own weird dynamics. And then, obviously there were very few people that would call the situation that Tom Crean inherited an attractive thing to step into, especially at that time with no transfer portal and no NIL. I mean, that was from the ground floor, a rebuild that, I'm sure that they had other people that were interested, but that made the job in and of itself very unattractive at the time, I'm sure, to a lot of people. Stepping in for Crean to Archie Miller, I suppose that wasn't the worst time, and probably somewhat analogous to now, where Crean had built, kind of built the program back up to a bit more respectable level. But Crean was also an interesting case because if you want to go with the fishbowl narrative, like, the fact that of everybody that's been fired post Bob Knight, he was the one that was the most questionable decision. Caught some people off guard that Fred Glass made that decision, with what was it, 2 Big Ten titles and 3 Sweet 16s in 5 years. I mean, you don't see that very often at any level. So that did kind of suggest that it was a little bit of a fishbowl, if you want to go with that kind of scenario, because that's going to run some people off. Like, man, if they fire a coach in that scenario, they'll fire my ass in 2 years if I don't do a good job. And that was pre-portal pretty much as well too. So and then post Archie to Woodson, I'm not gonna feed the rumor mill too much, but it's certainly, based on all the conversations I've had, it certainly seems like there were elements of that not being an entirely kind of organic athletic director led search too much as well either. So there's been all this weird dynamics, all these weird tentacles, and people wanting to have their say. If this is truly, a situation where Scott gets to make this decision, and it's, the program, leave aside the state of the roster, which we're going to get to next, I think it's not a bad situation to step into relative to some of that other craziness that's gone on in the last 25 years.
Yeah, I mean, calling it analogous to the Tom Crean, post Tom Crean era is somewhat reasonable, I suppose. I mean, Indiana at this point is coming off a going to be coming off, I guess no matter how this ends, is going to be coming off what feels like a second down year in a row, after, I mean, after, a really strong season in year 2 under Woodson, and obviously year 1 just getting back to the tournament in of
Right.
itself was huge. But I mean, yeah, look, I was, a sophomore in college covering the team when they fired Tom Crean. And I mean, that was definitely questionable in some ways, in the big picture. There were concerns. It felt like about, if I recall correctly, it seemed like the sentiment was just that he had, taken the team as far as people seemed to think he could, that, he had been there for so long and just hadn't broken through. And, so, there's kind of a glass half full, glass half empty narrative to that search. Like, as you said, coaches could be scared off by that and say, if I don't do a good job, then, just come in and be fearful of their job security, pretty quickly. But there's the other side of that coin that, the coach that they bring in, clearly, if they're going to move on from that guy, they're looking for a guy that thinks that you can take them to that Final Four, to that next level. And you got to have a guy who's confident enough to think that they can do that job. And, obviously, it went the way it went, but I think there are plenty of coaches who would find that sort of thing attractive too. These people that are self-confident and self-promoting enough to put themselves in that position to say, hey, I can be the one to take Indiana back to the Final Four. And, that's not a dissimilar position to where Indiana is right now. That, there's obviously, stylistic differences and, differences just to, with everything that's changed about the sport as a whole since then. But it is a pretty similar position to that. And it's still an attractive job, like I said.
Yeah. And I guess to segue into the candidates for this thing, I'm interested to compare notes here because talking with friends who are IU fans, reading our comments on the site or on social media, like my clear sense of where the fan base is at is that the search is basically Brad, Dusty, or the wheels are coming off real quick. Well, are you seeing the same sort of thing?
I mean, there's a lot of names that get thrown around here. And look, to be honest, I'm not sure that there is, even with Brad Stevens and Dusty May, I don't know that there is a such thing as a truly perfect candidate for this job. I think all of the candidates involved, I think, have reasonable, there's reasonable question, at least a question mark of some sort around all of these. And to be honest, I think Brad Stevens may not have had that, in the past, but I wrote about this in the candidate profile I did for our site on Brad Stevens. Is just obvious. No one's going to question his ability to coach or to do everything involved, but it has now been over a decade since he's ran a college basketball program, and things are a lot different, with college basketball and running a program and recruiting and all of that. And he's never had to deal with the transfer portal. He didn't have to deal with NIL and all of that before. And, so there's no guarantee that he comes in and figures that out. I mean, there's no guarantee that he comes in and it's just immediately consistent success like he had at Butler. The sport has changed. And so that's, you got to keep that in mind with Brad Stevens too. Again, very, no one's going to doubt his coaching ability or, the fit for the job or, he's only 48 years old. He'd still be like the fourth, I think it was the fourth youngest head coach in the Big Ten, even with all the experience he's had. But and you look at Dusty May, and I mean, like we were just talking all about how one of the biggest things Indiana's going to want is a proven winner at the high major level. And I mean, how proven are you looking for when you say you want a proven winner? Because, Dusty May reached the Final Four with FAU and had, a few really strong seasons at FAU, and he's doing really well. Michigan has looked really good. One of the better teams one of the best teams in the Big Ten this year. but this has been his only season at the high major level. And
Right.
are you going to say that one strong season at the high major level is quote unquote proven enough? And
Right.
so I think there's no such thing as a perfect candidate. I think Brad Stevens would be the name that would be the most crowd pleasing for sure. And, you probably wouldn't hear much of any negativity if they pulled off that move. But pretty much everybody else, like there's going to, I think you're not going to make this hire without, some people winding up a little upset about whatever direction you went. But I mean, there's a lot of names that get thrown around. Those Dusty May and Brad Stevens are two of the more desired, two of the hotter names you hear out there. Chris Beard's name gets thrown out there a lot too, but that's a whole complicated situation beyond just the actual basketball. So that's probably the other name that I feel like I see most often.
Yeah. Sticking with Stevens for a minute. I mean, I think it's pretty clear 4 years ago that Indiana started there. There's legitimate reports of what was it, 7 years, 70 million
Mm-hmm.
offer. I think Woj and others reported on that. So I think that's pretty clear. And so I've got to believe in this, not source, just opinion. I've got to believe that's exactly where this process has started once again. Something you mentioned also in your profile, and I knew this, but I hadn't really focused on it. A commenter on the site kind of highlighted this morning and got me thinking more about it, was the fact that his son is a walk-on at Notre Dame. I just wonder like how much that changes his thought process. Like, the chance to, if his son would follow him to Indiana, which you got to believe he would, the chance to coach his son for 4 years. I think he's a freshman yet now, so he could have 4 years of eligibility. Um, to basically groom him for his coaching career. I gotta believe that's compelling. My understanding of some of the resistance, beyond the obvious of just the appealing life in the NBA, was that just family considerations have weighed heavily. But obviously those dynamics are changing with one in college who you could be with every day and groomed to be a coach or a NBA executive or whatever the case may be down the road. Certainly seems like it would change it. I know that they've got other family members as well, but hadn't really thought about that too much until today. But I have to believe that if nothing else, the dynamics in the Stevens household are probably a little bit different now than they were 4 years ago when they had much younger kids.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, none of the things you say about his son are wrong. I mean, I have to imagine that he would transfer in if Brad Stevens took the job. But the other side of that coin is his daughter's sophomore. I can't remember, sophomore or a junior in high school, and
Right.
I mean, so that kind of is that would be a really tough time for her if the family, and not to say that she could probably, I can imagine they'd be able to find a way for her to finish out high school in Massachusetts and then just bring everybody back after that. But I mean, if that was the case, I mean, that's a tough time to have that sort of life change when you're,
Yep.
I mean, just think about that. Like she's probably, going through the process of finding where she wants to go to college herself.
Right.
And, so, there may be a push one way, but there's a pull the other way. So, and there's no way for us to truly know what the real dynamic is there. But I mean, I think it's hard to mention one without the other.
Yeah, for sure. It just got me thinking because you like even in the Big Ten, you think like Steven Izzo and Hoiberg's son. Like you see this a lot where like the coach has their
The
son.
McCaffreys.
Yeah, exactly. Like as a dad, I can definitely see the appeal in something like that and how it might change somebody's thinking if they were really kind of on the margin the last time about it. So like I said, I gotta believe the search is starting there. I gotta believe that they're gonna try as hard as they can to get him. I can't believe that we're here 4 years later doing it all over again with him, because it was like, it got crazy 4 years ago and I never really believed it. I do, I don't want to make people send people over the edge, but I do think there's more legitimacy to it this time than there was last time. But I don't
And
have.
look, when they hired Archie Miller, people were daydreaming about bringing Brad Stevens in too.
Right,
So
right.
this is really round 3 of of this
Yeah,
chaos.
it goes all the way back to the back-to-back national championship appearances. Like there's some people that think they should have booted Crean out the door right at that time, even though if I'm remembering right, that's like right when Crean had IU back. So,
Mhm.
it's gonna go on until probably Brad, starts collecting Social Security.
As if
um,
that would stop people.
right, right, right. Um, and with Dusty, like you said, already has a Final Four appearance. Currently has Michigan in first place in the Big Ten, doing the exact job that Indiana needs to be done, like stepping in, rebuilding, using the portal. He's pretty much proving it right now, and I would even say with a somewhat flawed roster. I mean, he's got those two big men, Wolf and Golden, are studs, but the rest of their lineup it's okay, but it's not like he has some superstar, 5-star, top to bottom roster. I mean, I think he's exceeding expectations by a pretty wide margin this year with the roster that he put together. The big question everybody has with Dusty May is, would he leave after 1 year at Michigan? And my continuing argument on that is going to be this: if Indiana is your dream job, and I have no idea if it is, I don't think he's ever said anything like that. You just kind of read the tea leaves with his background and assume that it is. But if this is a job he truly wants, he has to assume this is the only time he's going to have a chance to get it. That's my take on it.
I mean, yeah, like you say, there's no way for us to know, what he dreamed about when he was
Right.
a kid growing up in Bloomfield. But and maybe the IU, maybe coaching at Indiana was a pipe dream to him then. But there's that is ultimately what it comes down. I mean, it comes down to, obviously, it also, I mean, Michigan negotiating a new contract with him potentially, and if Michigan gives him a lot more money, and does he want to deal with moving again, and
Right.
the real life kind of implications of bouncing from job to job. Does he want to move his family and just uproot his life for the second time in 2 years? And that could be part of it too. But ultimately, yeah, if this is his dream job, they'd probably find a way to make it work.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess, getting into the kind of the wheels coming off scenario, at least from the perception of the fan base, if it turns out that neither one of those two end up being viable, we've seen this a lot lately. I think, Louisville and Kentucky both last year kind of got deep into their lineups of who everybody thought they might go after and got turned down a few times. Who would you say is your, like, if you were advising the fans and you said this is the guy you should be pulling for? Is there someone that really stands out to you that is the logical guy there?
That's a tough question. You're putting me on the spot here.
Well, let me
I
give
will
you my
go ahead.
I was going to give you mine if you're not, if you want to think about it or pull a
Yeah.
pot list
Go.
or or whatever
Yeah.
the
Go.
case
Yeah.
may
Yeah.
be.
Go ahead.
I think he might be coming in tomorrow. Um, I've heard he has a high buyout. I'm talking Mick Cronin, UCLA. Not only for his track record, but I'm kind of stunned by the negativity I see when I see his name mentioned. Like, there's a lot of, like, he raises the ceiling, but he's never going to bring you a national championship. But if you look at what he's done, he's been to a Final Four. I think he had 11 NCAA tournaments in a row. The most compelling thing I saw with him, doing some research on him, is 5 of the last 8 years he's won 27 or more games. I mean, that's pretty crazy. Indiana hasn't won 27 games since 2016. So just to juxtapose those two facts, and I'm not sure, like, I'm not sure how good of a job UCLA is right now. Like, what I've read about him is, like, this past year he had to go out and basically do all the fundraising for NIL. Like, I think Indiana has a much better infrastructure. You've heard him very publicly complaining about the, being a West Coast Big Ten team and all the travel that goes along with that. Like, I almost feel like he's kind of crying out to be considered for this job, or just to voice his frustrations with his current situation there. But he's doing a good job. Like, he was very vocally critical of his players, and they turned around and won 7 games in a row. He has a long track record. I think he's over 500 career wins. I, I I know me even saying this will kind of send a certain element of the fan base into some rage, but I think he would be a solid choice if you have to go past those first 2 guys.
I mean, yeah, I absolutely agree. I mean, to the point that, quote, he raises the ceiling, but he can't bring you a national championship. I mean, let's be honest with ourselves about what the NCAA tournament is. If
Yeah.
you're winning 27 games a year, you are consistently putting your team in a
Yes.
position to have a good chance at winning that. And then it's just about it's the NCAA tournament is a roll of the dice.
Absolutely.
It's about who's the hottest team playing the right basketball at the right time of year. And there's a lot of randomness associated with that. People don't remember, people remember who wins it all at the end of the year, but certain calls go one way, bad luck plays go another way, and the outcomes change. And only one team a year wins a national championship, and it's really hard to do for a reason. And look how many. There's so few active coaches in college basketball that have a national championship to their name that it is extremely likely that whoever Indiana brings in will not have won a national championship before. I mean,
right.
I'm looking at the list of national champions right now. You want to count up how many coaches there are that have active coaches in college basketball that have national championships? Dan Hurley, Bill Self, Scott Drew, and then Rick Pitino, even though that was vacated, and Tom Izzo, and that's basically it. That's your list of active college basketball coaches who have won a national championship. And the only name that is really involved at all is, Scott Drew's name has gotten thrown out a few times,
Yep.
but Scott Drew very publicly turned down Kentucky last year. So, it kind of, same sort of thing as Dusty May. If this is the job that Scott Drew had been holding out for so long for, then sure, then, he would, obviously would be a great candidate for this job. But if he just turned down Kentucky, it's reasonable to think he's probably not going to want the IU job either. So, yeah, Indiana's probably hiring a coach that hasn't won a national championship before, and people need to understand that. And so then if you're looking at Mick Cronin, yeah, he's gotten the team to a Final Four. He's been consistently successful with multiple programs, mind you. Like it's not like he's only, the success is not only, out in sunny LA. I mean, he was pretty consistently successful at Cincinnati too. And it's not like that's a program that's covered itself in glory since then. So, so not to diss Cincinnati, but the point being, yeah, Cronin, that is a name that comes to mind for, somebody who could be quote unquote the top candidate to take over, if you're getting past the top 2. I mean, there's other guys who, I go back to your humongo list, that you made at the very beginning. And I mean, you scroll through here. The other name that would come to mind, I think that, could be somewhat realistic. And, because look, if you say, you put like Rick Pitino on there or Jay Wright, and I mean, I think that you're getting into daydreaming territory, and daydreaming or just very unrealistic territory when you're looking at that. The couple other names I think that are on here that could be realistic and could be strong hires are TJ Otzelberger from Iowa State. I think he's done an outstanding job at Iowa State, and I think there could be reasons why he would be interested to move up to a level like Indiana from Iowa State. But I think that would be an extremely strong hire.
Yep.
And I think Todd Golden down at Florida as well.
Hmm.
I think he's young. He's still under 40, but I mean, look at the way Florida's playing this year. I mean, Florida is this is year 3 at Florida for him, and he has Florida looking like a team that could lift a banner next year.
Yeah, and I agree completely with both of those guys. And another name I'll throw out that I think people kind of have a bad reaction to, but if you only looked at his last 2 years, including this year, I think people, and you could erase the past, people would be jumping all over him like he was the top candidate on the board as Brad Brunell at Clemson. Elite Eight last year. Has already beaten both Duke and North Carolina this year. Going to go back to back to the NCAA tournament, and I think one of the tougher places to win in college basketball, given all of the traditional powers in the ACC. Indiana guy too, with some connections. I think but people look at before that, but how important is the previous 15 years if your last few have been really good? I don't, maybe he figured something out, but I think if we
Well,
start
ask Indiana fans how they would like that scenario in Bloomington.
yeah, no, I know, I believe me, my social media mentions and comments, like, basically you're either talking about Brad or Dusty right now, or you're hated. Basically, that's where
Brad
we're at.
Stevens.
Yeah, what I say.
You just said Brad after talking about Brad Brunell.
Yeah. Fair. Yeah. So
Also, I couldn't. I just noticed this the other night. I swear, Brad Brunell and Chris Beard are like long lost cousins or something. They're like long lost, like identical twins separated at birth.
yeah, they look like they've probably have some beers together. And we should talk about Beard real quick, because I will, continuing the theme of what the fans are saying, like that his name generates the most rage, like on both sides of the conversation. Like if you say he's a legit contender, that infuriates a lot of people because of his legal history, domestic issues, and whatnot. But there's an equally vocal amount of fans that will say, like, how could you not have Chris Beard in your top tier of coaches? I think some of that's because of the Bob Knight connection. I think some of it's because he's been to a national championship game, and obviously just had a really nice coaching career. But just going back to criteria, going back to what we know about Scott Dolson, about the pressure to get this hire right, about the misstep with Kelvin Sampson, and just kind of looking past his history of issues and how that came back to bite them. I just don't see any way Indiana does that. Chris Beard is a compelling candidate, but he's not that compelling that you're going to put everything on the line with a questionable history and kind of stake everything you've got into him right now. I don't see it happening.
With all that is at stake for this hire, for the program, for Scott Dolson, I think there's a large element of this hire that is risk mitigation. And that's,
Yeah.
I think using that term makes it sound like you're going with a safe candidate over the right candidate. And that, I don't mean it in that context, because, I don't think that that's what this is referring to. But I think risk mitigation is, if you're Scott Dolson, you do not want to bring in a candidate that could have, like you say, like Calvin Sampson, they overlooked those issues and it blew up in their face because of that. And
Right.
you do not want to have a candidate, that, Chris Beard had those off court troubles, which led to his exit at Texas. And
Right.
there's enough riding on this just purely basketball wise, with on the court. If you're Scott Dolson, I do not think you can take the chance of bringing in somebody like Chris Beard. And again, you could bring in Chris Beard, and basketball wise, it might not work out, is the other thing.
Right.
So
right.
like on top of all of that, like there's no guarantee ever with anybody. But on top, so I think on top of that risk you're already taking with whoever you bring in, I don't think you can afford to take a chance on a guy who has those sort of issues in his past, and basically you're just hoping that it doesn't blow up on you. I don't think that's a risk they can afford to take.
Let me give you the three funniest names I could come up with because I felt we could we could touch on a lighter side to this whole thing. We'll see if you can add anybody that's to this list. If you were just going for pure entertainment value, one would be Kelvin Sampson, who I mentioned. Like he's if this wasn't the Indiana search, like he would be legitimately be on any big coaching search right now just because he's doing a great job at Houston. That's the irony of everything, that the way it turned out with him is he's one of the best coaches in college basketball. I don't think you can argue with that. Number two would be Matt Painter. Um, think about the parallels between his resume and like Stevens or May. Like Matt Painter grew up an IU fan, wanted to play for IU. You look at his track record as a college coach, like checks every box, in terms of success. We're talking about like Dusty and Brad going to Final Fours and national championship games. Now Painter can claim that. So like again, like if it wasn't the IU job, Painter would be a guy that you would look at. And the last one I'll add is Sean Miller. Just for pure entertainment value. Another really good college coach that, obviously is not going to get considered for this job. Who else you got? Anybody come to mind?
You know who comes to mind? And this would be a very negative form of entertainment for Indiana fans, but for Indiana to move on from Mike Woodson, who with his NBA coaching background that just did not work, and it was so his biggest appeal was his connection to the program. The funny one to move on from that to take them into the next era is just bringing Randy Whitman and putting him in the job.
Yeah, that would be good. Like I almost think at this point, anybody with an IU basketball, like a former player, kind of falls into that category. Like I heard several negative comments about including Steve Alford on my initial master list. And like all I was trying to do is say, like, if I was Scott Dolson, this would be my Rolodex of coaches, or this would be like, I'd have pressure from somewhere to put this guy on my list. That's all that was. But yeah, like Steve Alford, like, I think 4 years ago there was like Michael Lewis and Dane Fife, were appearing on lists. Like I think all of that is out the window now. I think if anything has died over the last 4 years, it's the notion of hiring an IU guy for the job this time.
Yeah, but even beyond that too, just going from the older NBA coach to another older NBA
right,
coach.
Right, yeah. Whitman might be the most extreme example. Coincidentally, a consultant of Woodson's right now. So, all right. Well, I think that's a pretty good recap of the week and kind of where we see things going. I'd like to kind of keep doing this on a weekly basis for as long as this thing goes. It could just be a couple more weeks, could be a couple months. Who knows? Who knows how long we'll be doing this thing?
Buckle up.
All right. We'll leave it there. He's Seth Tao. I'm Mike Schumann for East 17th Street. We'll catch you all next time.